Yes,
Hi
hello, Tanisha.
there.
Hi, everyone
Hi.
who's watching.
Great. Let me make you co-host and then we'll get
Yes,
started.
please.
So Paula, you're in Madrid, yeah?
Yes,
Excellent. Master student in geopolitics, and you're focusing on Middle Eastern and Mediterranean politics, as well as the study and preservation of cultural artifacts and pop culture. So,
yes,
absolutely
that's right.
love that. Great,
Yes,
great. Really interested in this. And again, I just love how all of these things kind of tie into each other. There's just a holistic and organic flow to all the topics that we've been talking about. So, super looking forward to this. Let me get you spotlighted and take it away.
yes. Give me a second because I'm trying to
Sure.
share my screen and I'm a little bit confused if I'm honest right now. So I'm really
No
trying.
worries. No worries.
Just a second.
Hmm.
Um, yes. All right. So I think I'm sharing my screen now.
Yep.
Um,
Perfect.
okay, can everybody see right?
Perfect.
Okay, so first, before I start, I want to thank you, Tanisha, and the PWSA for having me here and giving me a space for me and my work. And also, thank you to all the presenters. You have been excellent. I am really enjoying this conversation. And yes, I will be starting with my paper. So, on Christmas morning of 2003, millions of American families turned on their televisions expecting to watch wrestling as per usual. The ring was the same, the superstars were the same, and the commentators were the same. But this time, surrounding it, there were M1 Abrams tanks, Humvees, Black Hawk helicopters, and thousands of soldiers in uniform cheering in the middle of the Baghdad desert. This is when WWE's chairman, Vince McMahon, walked out and told his troops and the millions watching at home that he had brought them a little slice of Americana. That phrase is the title of this paper, and today I want to argue that what happened on that stage was not just entertainment but an act of geopower. So, oops. Yes, it's a little overview of the presentation. And to start with the context, to understand the claim I just made, we need to understand the moment that this episode was born into. So, the 2003 US led invasion of Iraq emerged from a very particular post 9/11 atmosphere, which was collective trauma, a doctrine of preemptive war, and a government communication strategy deliberately designed to manufacture public consent. The official justifications were weapons of mass destruction, links to Al Qaeda, and the liberation of the Iraqi people. But here's the paradox. The more aggressively the administration promoted that narrative, the more it exposed that the more it exposed what Lewis and Best called a meaning deficit, which is the gap between those abstract official justifications that the government gave for the war and the grim, largely absent realities of war. So basically, the coffins didn't appear on television. The civilian casualties weren't broadcasted. The human cost of the war remained invisible to the domestic audience. So then the question becomes, how does a nation process a distant, controversial war if it cannot see it? It fills the void. And popular culture, and specifically sports entertainment, was perfectly positioned to do exactly that. So the WWE's Tribute to the Troops saga ran for two full decades from 2003 to 2023. And it went from active broadcasting from active war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan to then domestic US venues from 2010. And then after COVID, it started seeing a decline until the last episode in 2023, under a very different geopolitical climate than when the saga started in 2003. And yet, this is a saga that almost no one in academia has studied. So there is a clear gap in the literature when it comes to professional wrestling's direct intersection with active military deployments. Most existing scholarship focuses on Cold War era patriotism in wrestling, on Hulk Hogan defeating the Iron Sheik, many things like this. but the specific mechanics of how WWE physically transported its entire apparatus into a live war zone and what that meant geopolitically, that remains unexamined to this day. So this paper tries to begin to fill that gap, starting with the foundational episode of the saga, which is called Christmas from Baghdad 2003. And yes, this takes me to my research question. Um, which is how did the 2003 WWE Christmas from Baghdad special employ tabloid realism and strategic branding to simplify the complexities of the Iraq War for a domestic audience? For this, we used the case study of the foundational episode of WWE SmackDown. Um, it broadcasted on December 25th of 2003. It was 85 minutes and it was broadcasted to millions. And the particularity about this episode is that it was, for once, sitting in the middle of an active war zone, uh, 9 months into one of the most controversial invasions in recent history. So, to answer that question, I draw on four key theoretical frameworks. The first one is tabloid geopolitics from Debris, which argues that certain media forms use spectacular imagery and moral simplicity to produce audiences who accept geopolitical truths as common sense, not through argument, but through spectacle and fear. So second is sports militarism from San Pedro, which describes what happens when conflict is framed through sports entertainment logic, when audiences are called into being not critical citizens, but patriotic fans. So you're basically cheering for your team and you are booing for the villain, and you never really ask why the game is being played in the first place. The third block I will be speaking about is Jacksonian values from Otuahile, which identifies a specific American cultural tradition of honor, personal courage, and the figure of the individual hero that centers the soldier as a moral anchor, deflecting scrutiny away from broader strategic or political questions. And finally, we have the meaning deficit and neorality from Lewis and Best, where the war's absent horrors are filled by an insistent emotional presence, transforming geopolitical complexity into a visceral, shared community experience. So, together, these four frameworks give us the tools to dissect what the WWE was doing in Baghdad in 2003. So, the data source that I use for the methodology is the complete televised transcript of the 85-minute episode sourced via Netflix. So it's a little bit over 13,000 words of dialogue, commentary, audience reactions, and visual cues. And I analyzed it using qualitative discourse analysis through Atlas TI, structured around six primary codes and 20 subcodes. You can see on the right the six main codes, which go from the hero Jacksonian values um, to tabloid realism. So each code category was derived from the theoretical literature, and every interpretive claim that I make is grounded directly on the transcript. So first, before we go into the episode, I want to be transparent that qualitative analysis carries inherent subjectivity, and I'll return to that in the limitations. But this framework gives us a rigorous, systematic way to read what the broadcast was actually doing beneath the surface of entertainment. So this is what the episode looked like. You see a wrestling ring surrounded by tanks, surrounded by thousands of soldiers in uniform, sitting on armored vehicles, some of them carrying guns, the WWE flying logo above Baghdad. So if any of you had turned on your television that Christmas morning without any context, expecting WWE, you might have found something more similar to a Hollywood film, a military recruitment advertisement, not the regular WWE broadcast. So, yes, let's start with the analysis. My first finding concerns what I'm calling geopower and reterritorialization. But before I get there, I want to offer some context because what the WWE did in 2003 did not emerge from a vacuum. The use of sport to manage public opinion in wartime has a long history. During World War II, the US government deliberately maintained Major League Baseball to sustain civilian morale, understanding that the performance of normality was itself an ideological resource. Also, during the Cold War, the Olympics became a proxy battlefield. So basically, sports has always been a site where nations perform power. But what happened in Baghdad represents something more radical, the physical occupation of sovereign foreign territory by a media brand in real time during an active invasion. So let's look at the images on this slide. The commentators never really describe this location as Iraqi land. They never situate it within a sovereign state. Instead, what they do is constantly call it the Camp Victory Arena, borrowing the military's own naming convention, which had itself renamed one of the Saddam Hussein's former palaces. Baghdad then is made placeless. Its history is erased, identity is replaced. The complex reality of an occupied capital is absorbed into the WWE story world. And by the following year, Camp Victory Arena became a selectable venue in the WWE video game franchise. A war zone is turned into intellectual property. So this is what the Ruiz called tabloid imperialism. We see this in action, where an active war zone is not just reported upon, it is claimed by being part of a fictional universe such as the WWE. So, story point two has to do with the cast, faces versus heels. Now that we have this space, we need the characters for the play. So, this second part talks about that. So I want to add some historical depth about heels and faces because this binary predates the WWE's use of the term by a very long time. So the hero-villain dynamic in wrestling originally emerged in the early 20th century, carnival and fairground circuit, long before television, long before Vince McMahon. So the villain or the heel was always the outsider. You have the foreign challenger, the corrupt authority figure, the ethnic or the racial other. And the function was the same then as it is now, to give audiences someone to boo, someone whose defeat feels morally satisfying. What's critical to understand is that the heel always reflects local anxieties, and this is not a uniquely American device. In Mexican lucha libre, the rudo, which is the equivalent of the heel, is typically the corrupt authority figure or the wealthy class villain. Or, for example, British wrestling's pantomime tradition, the heel is the establishment figure, the rule bender. So the villain is always culturally specific and is always a mirror of what a society fears or resents at a particular moment. So in the 1980s, WWE during the Cold War, this logic was codified very explicitly, for instance, with the figure of the Iron Sheikh, who played an Iranian villain after the hostage crisis. Also, you have Nikolai Volkov, who was the Soviet menace, or Sergeant Slaughter, who briefly became the Iraqi sympathizer during the Gulf War. And these were not subtle choices. But in 2003, Baghdad Special, the heel is no longer a caricatured foreigner. The heel is a real political figure, Saddam Hussein, who had been captured very briefly before the episode aired. So soldiers in the audience, as you can see here, were holding signs such as "God Saddam." Uh, for instance, one commentator says, just like the US troops led the smackdown on Saddam Hussein, Cena led the smackdown to the Big Show. So this is explicitly equating a wrestling match with a military mission. So Hussein is then reduced to a physically viable body, a cartoon villain whose defeat produces the same gut satisfaction as a finishing move. And the face, meanwhile, is a hypermasculine American soldier. Stone Cold Steve Austin is described as embodying what the armed forces are all about by the commentators. Or wrestlers' bodies are repeatedly compared to military hardware. For instance, the Big Show is described as nearly the size of an M1 Abrams tank. So the two institutions, entertainment and military, become fused into one single unified American heroic identity. So what we are watching in Ottawa terms is Jacksonian values in real time. You see honor, you see individual courage, the righteous hero defeating the foreign villain. And the moral universe of professional wrestling maps perfectly onto the moral universe that the administration was trying to construct around the Iraq invasion. So the third point um, concerns what Debris calls tabloid realism, or the use of material evidence to produce a sense of authentic danger and thereby validate the narrative. So, the transcript contains what I can only describe as a very enthusiastic inventory or of military hardware. Commentators list M1 Abrams tanks, M2 Bradleys, Australian Piranhas, Humvees, trucks, field ambulances. A safety warning about possible sniper fire and mortar attacks is broadcast during the episode, and even one soldier mentions that his building was hit 4 days earlier. So this danger is invoked just enough to make the spectacle feel real, to lend it in the gravity of war, and then it is immediately neutralized by the entertainment frame. The moment the warning is mentioned, a wrestling match begins. The tanks are cheerfully described as if they were arena props, and as you can see in the image here, the hardware becomes set pieces. The ring, for instance, becomes a media production zone, and the audience of uniformed soldiers becomes something between a crowd and a cast. So San Pedro describes this as the application of Hollywood production techniques to military occupation. The WWE is not reporting on the war, it is instead directing it as a television production. And by doing so, it transforms instruments of war into background scenery, something that is familiar, domestic, and clearly not threatening. So my fourth finding concerns what Otuahel calls somatic markers, or emotional triggers that bypass rational deliberation and produce gut-level responses on the watcher. So the most significant of these, deployed repeatedly through the episode, is September 11th. So John Cena, who at the time of the broadcast was one of WWE's biggest rising stars, at some point addresses the troops and thanks them for what, and I quote, fighting for the people who lost their lives on the day of the falling buildings. So he doesn't say 9/11, he doesn't say the Twin Towers. He says the day of the falling buildings, which is a phrase that is designed not to inform but to evoke sensation, the feeling of watching those towers fall, and the collective trauma of an entire nation. So, by invoking that memory in Baghdad in 2003, the episode performs a critical rhetorical move. It collapses the distinction between the 9/11 attackers and the Iraqi state. So, Iraq and Al Qaeda are emotionally fused, not through argument, not through evidence, but through affect. So, Vince McMahon's opening speech performs the same function as at the institutional level when he thanks the troops for protecting freedom, defending the nation, and for kicking ass, taking names, and capturing Saddam. Every sentence escalates the emotional register until rational deliberation has no more foothold. So this is what Lewis and Best call the new orality, which is the replacement of a writing democracy, where citizens engage critically with policy, with a broadcast democracy, where war is experienced as a shared emotional event. The flow that you see at the bottom of the slide is an example of this mechanism. So you get the 9/11 memory, then you get a gut reaction, rational deliberation is bypassed, and then consent is manufactured. Okay, so before concluding, I have a note on limitations. The primary limitation here is obviously inherent to qualitative discourse analysis, which is interpretive subjectivity. So my coding choices and theoretical lenses are shaped by a specific body of literature. I've mitigated this by grounding every claim in direct textual evidence from the transcript, but a different researcher using different frameworks might draw different emphasis. And then the second limitation is obviously the absence of prior scholarship on individual Travel to the Troops episodes, which meant I had no methodological precedent to work from. But this is also where the research potential becomes super significant. So what you see on this slide is 20 years of an analyzed broadcast across four administrations. You have Bush, you have Obama, Trump, and Biden. So each of those contexts was radically different. And how did the WWE's framing of military service shift from the high intensity of the war on terror to the post-withdrawal era? Or how does corporate statecraft evolve when the wars change? Those questions remain entirely open, which for me is a great potential. So, to bring everything together, on Christmas Day of 2003, the WWE performed something that had never been done before in the history of the show. It transformed its entire apparatus, from its starts to its ring to the cameras to the brand, into an active war zone and broadcast the results to millions as entertainment. This paper argues that what happened was not incidental but structural. So, first we have the idea of reterritorialization, where Baghdad was symbolically annexed and its local identity was erased. Its sovereign territory was rebranded as Camp Victory Arena, which became a venue within the WWE Universe, stripped of its history and absorbed into a global entertainment brand. Second, we have sports militarism, where citizens were interpolated not as critical subjects of foreign policy, but as patriotic fans. By deploying the hero-villain binary, which is a narrative structure as old as carnival wrestling, the episode reduced the ethical complexity of an invasion to the satisfaction of watching the good guy win once again. And third, we have the legacy. This was not an isolated moment. It was the founding episode of a 20-year saga, a template for modern entertainment militarism that outlasted 2 wars and 4 presidents. The WWE Universe is not just fiction. It is, as this analysis demonstrates, an active agent of geopower, capable of domesticating war, manufacturing consent, and delivering a nation's citizens to a specific emotional and political position. So the little slice of Americana that Vince McMahon delivered to Baghdad that Christmas morning was not just entertainment, it was ideology wrapped in pyrotechnics. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed.
Yes. What was that last bar you just said? What was the last sentence you just said? The something wrapped in pyrotechnics. What did you just say?
Yeah, it was ideology wrapped in pyrotechnics.
Oh, ooh, yeah. Is that what the kids do? They're like, you know, when they do the little chopsticks thing, little after,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, clock it, like all the whatever else the kids do it, like that was excellent. See, even Sloan
Thank you
said the
so
same
much.
thing. Yo, like that was a bar. Like that, excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that. I'll open it up so because I could just go and then talk about tell me this. But are there any questions or comments from the audience? Is there was just so like it was just excellent between even the clocking it, and I even wrote down another. Well, as you see, things I was putting in the chat as you were talking too were just so huge. But even I wrote Warzone turned into intellectual property, right? When you were talking about that, it's huge, and I didn't realize that went for 20 years. Yeah, and that's just huge. And that's why I love the way this kind of like organically is just tied into everything. We've been kind of opening it up with Americana and performative stuff, right? And now like all the way down into looking at this and the way that another quote that you said that I wrote down I thought was so strong. Like sport has always been kind of a stage, right, for nations to perform this type of power.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, it was just so huge. And now we're I don't want to guess or assume like how old you were. Like, do you remember watching that 2003? Like, I remember watching it and just being so confused.
Yeah, so actually, I never really watched Travel to the Troops episodes until
Yeah.
maybe last year when I started getting interested. But I do remember when I was little, I bought the SmackDown versus Raw 2009 game, and me and my
Hmm.
brother would play it so much. And one day we were looking at the different stages and we just saw this military arena and we're very confused why we could play as John Cena of Jeff Hardy, whoever, and
Yep.
in the middle of the military people. And then I just started like from that memory, I started pulling information and then I came across this whole saga and I started watching all the episodes. And it's just a gold mine, and I'm really sad that this whole saga hasn't gotten any academic attention because I truly feel like it's so interesting. And I just analyzed one episode and I got so much information. So imagine what you
Hmm.
can do with 20 years.
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. And so, and yeah, and you're studying geopolitics right now, right, for your master's, you
Yes,
were
I
saying,
am.
or yeah. So, have you, I'm curious what some of your other peers, like in your grad program, and have been saying, like with you referencing wrestling like this and using it as a reference. I'm just curious, like what their reaction was like, or are they, you know, becoming more aware of like how so much of wrestling is everywhere and everything and how it can be used as political agendas. Like we were just talking about, with what I was saying with the UFC and the White House lawn fight that's going to be coming up in a couple of years, like, and then compare that to 20 years ago, right? With the was Christmas in Baghdad as that's being branded with literally the tanks in the background, like all of these props,
Mhm.
right? As this performance art. So I'm curious, like how the rest of your program and how you integrating wrestling into your studies like this, how that's gone over.
Yes, so actually this presentation is comes from a paper that I wrote for my strategic studies class. And when
Hmm.
I told my peers that I was writing on this topic, many of them did not understand what I was
Yeah,
doing.
they're like, why? They're
Yeah.
like, it's
But then
fit reading.
as I kept explaining it to them, it made more sense to them. And so many of them have been curious to read what it was about. And yes, I'm seeing my peer Lele or Leticia
Yeah.
in the comments here. But
Yeah,
yes,
Leticia, I don't know if you want to comment too about, yeah, like imagining wrestling like being analyzed from this lens, but you've made it perfectly explicitly talk to me like I'm five clear because it's tried and true and it has never gone away. What else were you
yes,
going to
this
say?
thing with popular culture that
Hmm.
is often seen as this very like naive thing that nobody really thinks about. But in reality, when you see this sports
Right
spectacle
there.
or many other kinds of spectacles, it's very clear that it's not, it's very intentional with what they do and what they say.
Leticia, I saw you were unmuted for a second. Were you going to jump in?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that it was very interesting when Paula mentioned that she was doing her paper on wrestling. I was very confused because I
You're
could
like,
never imagine. Yeah, but then hearing her explaining, and for example, today presentation and also the other presentations, I just found out like a whole new other
whole new
world that I
world.
never heard of before, and it was all very interesting.
Right. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think that's why we do this, right? Within, PWSA and wrestling studies and on this global scale, because yeah, there's just so much. What can't you talk about when you're talking about like sports entertainment, MMA or pro wrestling? Like these different perspectives are so huge as you perfectly, presented and researched here. Yeah, just I thought it was absolutely excellent. Especially the methodology and the different points that you were using. That was tremendous. Are there any other comments or questions from folks? Let's see. I wonder if tribute for the troops informs WWE's relationship with SAT. Yeah, right. Like this, considering now with their ties, both involve planting American wrestlers in the Middle East for global audiences, captured cultural impact. Yeah, Jim, comment.
Yeah, that's such an interesting comment because I feel like we're seeing a very similar dynamic right now with WWE going to Saudi and
Mm-hmm.
the whole tribute to the troops when it was in the Middle East from 2003 to 2009. So we see all these, well, sort of a way of capturing global audience, but also, I don't know how to explain it very clearly, but kind of, sorry, yes, I got a little
Nice.
lost. But I feel like the initial, well, of course, it's very different because one was a tribute to the troops, the Americans who were in the Middle East deployed at the time, and another one is kind of open to everyone. But both of them exercise this exercise of deterritorialization. So, but in the very different ways. So in Christmas in Baghdad and also the episodes in Afghanistan and Tikrit, which is another city in Iraq, you see nothing about the sovereign land it's being done on. And for the Saudi ones, it is more mentioned, but it still feels like it could be done in America in that moment. So, but it is very
Mhm.
interesting. I feel like it would be interesting to research those two different things.
Absolutely, especially like the evolution of it, right? Their relationship and what kind of new impressions are being made and that we can project happening. Yeah, all the other comments were just about how incredible that was. So thank you, Paula. That absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Thank you,
Um,
everyone.
yes.